What will our future look like with AI technologies such as machine learning, computer vision, and natural language processing? What can we expect when algorithmic discrimination and data analysis are already an integral part of everyday life? Several interactive documentary projects, also called iDocs, which are themselves based on simulation, algorithms, and AI, aim to speculate on these developments and make users aware of current and potential future problems. The interactive documentary Survival of the Best Fit, for example, illustrates how AI in the human resources sector can reinforce structural discrimination when it is trained on problematic data. How Normal Am I is an interactive documentary revealing AI biases in rating faces for beauty, age, BMI, and more. The augmented reality experience Stealing Your Feelings addresses facial recognition in social networks and reveals how large companies could analyze personal data from selfies to increase profit. And Monster Match simulates dating app algorithms and explains how they categorize and pre-select users, sometimes creating discriminatory patterns. The four projects have in common that they use interactive forms such as personalized films, games, or simulations to make AI-based decision-making mechanisms, data evaluation processes, and biases experienceable. The iDocs speculate on the consequences of AI-powered systems for privacy and equal opportunities in society. However, how can documentary projects make hidden processes experienceable? And are the four iDocs documentary projects at all when their purpose is to produce new experiences for users? To explore these questions, I will first present research on iDocs, AI, and related perspectives in documentary theory to examine the extent to which the four projects are documentaries. Based on these theoretical considerations, I will explain my method, which combines formal aesthetic analyses with ethnographic affordance analyses. In the main part of my contribution, I use this approach to analyze the four projects in terms of how they make AI mechanisms and the workings of algorithms experienceable. The hypothesis is that in these projects, documentary practices become speculative tools that do not preserve the known, but rather enable us to question current and future developments. According to media scholar Thomas Weber, the term documentary can describe all processes and forms of media expression that use the gesture of pointing or referring to reality. This also includes practices and their media manifestations in the field of iDocs. Browser-based iDocs are interactive, non-linear documentary forms that combine videos, photos, texts, audio, maps, and other materials on websites. They enable various forms of interaction, thus they are not static artifacts but dynamic configurations. Examples are social interactions, selection and navigation, playful immersion, simulation, participation, and collaboration. In this contribution, simulation as an interactive documentary practice is of particular interest to us. Even before the proliferation of iDocs, there had been a shift in documentary filmmaking from the perceptual to the conceptual, as Mark Wolf explains. He introduced the concept of subjunctive documentary in 1999 and stated, "Simulation is concerned with what could be, would be, or might have been. It forms a subgenre of documentary we might call subjunctive documentary, following the use of the term subjunctive as a grammatical tense." End of quote. Since the documentary aspect of iDocs lies less in the representation of reality and more in the processes through which a reference to reality is constructed, simulations can also be part of these processes. To make the mechanisms of AI and algorithms experienceable in iDocs, projects can present simulations of these mechanisms, or even use AI and algorithms to demonstrate how they function. The latter approach is described in the documentary context as working with AI to make visible the workings of AI itself, and more generally as experiential AI. Drew Hammond et al. Explain, experiential artificial intelligence is an approach to the design, use, and evaluation of AI in culture or other real-world settings that foregrounds human experience and context. It combines arts and engineering to support rich and intuitive modes of model interpretation and interaction, making AI tangible and explicit. End of quote. Through artistic experiments, users are encouraged to gain a deeper understanding of how AI systems work, which promotes responsible use. Learning becomes a process of interaction between humans and machines. This works particularly well for iDocs. Anandana Kapoor and Nagmasahi Ansari state, code-based platforms and software augment the relational and generative aspects of documentary artifacts. End of quote. This includes customization, where users actively adapt the system to their own interests, and personalization, where the system automatically adapts to users' needs. Kapoor and Ansari explain that coding has become a means of producing novel experiences. Another option besides simulation can be augmentation for experiential forms of knowledge production. Therefore, it is important to understand interactive documentaries as performative and experiential systems. From a new materialist perspective, iDocs are dynamic assemblages in which human and non-human elements, such as algorithms, interact to produce meaning. Methods for analyzing interactive web documentaries can focus on their media form, using close analysis of narration, sound, imagery, and interface. Such material analysis is challenging because of the interactivity, nonlinearity, and ephemerality of these dynamic documentary projects. Therefore, Anavil identifies three perspectives that should be considered together: documentary methodologies, approaches from new media research, and the lens of performative medialities and a dynamic media ecology. In addition to these approaches, I propose an ethnographic affordance analysis as described by Christoph Breiter. He understands this method as an extension of digital ethnography. In this context, affordance refers to the properties of objects in terms of what they offer and the related options for action. Anavil explains, focusing on the affordances of new media documentary shifts the analysis from an assumed essentialist perspective to the interactions a configuration invites and enables one to do. End of quote. Ethnographic affordance analysis examines how technologies and media structure what users can do, how they enable certain actions while constraining others. For web documentaries, this means asking which features invite or restrict user actions. One way to investigate this is through self-observation. This allows researchers to examine their own perceptions and actions while using digital technologies and identify the affordances of individual functions more directly. Typical guiding questions include what appears on the interface, how we use the platform, what it affords, and what we feel as users. The method of self-observation cannot stand alone, as it remains bound to the researcher's subjective perspective. Therefore, this contribution also draws on content analyses of found data, such as reports on and discussions of the projects, for example, statements by the initiators and user reactions in forums. As Breiter explains, such content helps identify and describe dominant affordances of a technology. The interactive web documentary Stealing Your Feelings asks users to turn on their device's camera to record their emotions and microgestures while viewing a 6-minute documentary video. Based on this, the AI technology makes assumptions about users and presents them live in the documentary. In this process, the complexity of human emotions is reduced to very specific data displayed. The initiator, Noah Levinson, explains, I hope viewers learn a little bit about the current state of artificial intelligence and the ways that their favorite apps could be using them to make their lives and the world worse. End of quote. This demonstrates both the documentary intention and speculative dimension regarding possible future applications of facial recognition technologies. The project begins by asking users to enable the website to access their camera. This is the central affordance of this project. Users have no greater freedom of action. Instead, they follow algorithmic processes. As an augmented reality experience, the project uses the viewer's face to repeatedly display and analyze it within the experience. It feels strange to see yourself in that online video. For example, the iDoc analyzes how your facial expressions react to men and women to determine the extent of your biases. The project also tracks reactions to celebrities and makes broader claims about personality, preferences, and opinions. This raises questions about profiling and algorithmic authority because the AI technology presents its results as if they were neutral truth, despite being based on highly limited visual cues. The project also shows that these interpretations are not necessarily reliable, since users can consciously control their facial expressions. If you smile on purpose while looking at the pizza image, the AI is likely to interpret your reaction as being more positive. Thus, stealing your feelings exposes the dangers of emotion recognition technologies by producing simplified and potentially incorrect data about individuals. Even if the assumptions about users are correct, the web documentary highlights another risk: how such data might be used in the future. The narrator illustrates this with the greeting, "Welcome to your new life," as an input. The Mozilla Foundation, which funded the project, explains online, while it is not confirmed whether big tech companies have started using this AI, stealing your feelings explores its potential applications, including a Snapchat patent titled "Determining a Mood for a Group." End of quote. This quote highlights the project's speculative nature. However, the web documentary makes it a very tangible experience by allowing users to observe potential consequences, such as incorrect interpretations, in a personalized way. The fact that users' faces appear in the video and that once they've allowed camera access, they have no further control, shows how people might be at the mercy of such technologies in the future. The facial recognition iDoc How Normal Am I also focuses on personalized data analysis and shows how standardization through AI can influence our self-perception. The affordance in this case is very similar to that of stealing your feelings. You grant camera access and can only watch as your face is used for various analyses. As a user's walkthrough video shows, however, viewers are in most cases aware of what is being analyzed based on their facial features. For example, a beauty score. The project is more experimental as users are asked to test the limits of facial recognition technology, for example, by changing their distance from the camera. In particular, the iDoc questions the comparison with what is often referred to as normal, for example, the average body mass index. The speculative aspect becomes apparent when the narrator raises the question of who might use this data and how, such as life expectancy estimated based on one's appearance. The initiator 𝗔𝗯𝘀𝗁𝗁 explains, "These AI systems increasingly influence our lives. On dating websites, you may only be matched to people who are about equally attractive. An insurance agency might have bought profiles from companies that use algorithms to judge your health or mental stability. It could be that your job application was judged by an algorithm which determined that you weren't social enough for the company." The goal in developing this documentary was to support a public debate around these technologies and to help us value the freedom of feeling unwatched. In the web documentary, users experience how the freedom of feeling unwatched can be restricted when they are observed in a context where they do not expect it. At the beginning of the iDoc, pictures of dogs are displayed during what appears to be a page loading process. As a user, one assumes that these images are intended to entertain while one waits. In reality, however, our facial expressions are monitored during this period. The iDoc explains this at the end, when the analysis results are presented. User reactions to the project showed that the AI used in the iDoc had difficulty recognizing Black people. Furthermore, while some discuss the possibilities of manipulating the system with amusement, others view them with concern. However, in this case too, it is noticeable that personalization is particularly effective in making AI mechanisms expressible. Instead of reporting on others, the focus is on analyses that are of interest to the users themselves. In both projects, Stealing Your Feelings and How Normal Am I, users serve as data sources in interactive settings, while the iDocs interpret and classify data in real time. The documentary gesture shifts as the effects of credibility are no longer generated solely through reference, but through algorithmic feedback. Another new way of referring to reality, or rather speculating on the future reality, can be found in the projects Survival of the Best Fit and Monster Match. Monster Match is a gamified iDoc. The project deals with dating app algorithms and allows users to experience how the algorithms categorize and pre-select users, sometimes creating discriminatory patterns. Like in real dating apps, users first create a profile. The difference is that in Monster Match, only monsters can be created as an avatar. Some have a more human appearance, whereas others look more grotesque or frightening. Users can then choose between the suggested monsters, which mimics the swiping feature of real dating apps. If users like a creator, they receive a message from the monster in the game, and a simulated chat begins. Users do not have any real freedom of choice here. Instead, they can only choose from pre-written responses that ultimately have no significance for the rest of the game. The simulations are only meant to represent the mechanism of real dating apps. The game deals primarily with the algorithmic processes involved in suggesting potential partners. To illustrate this, the iDoc uses the same algorithms found in real dating apps, known as collaborative filtering. It explains this to users in a metatextual note. Real dating apps would also use the first swipes as the basis for further suggestions. Users are encouraged to identify patterns in the algorithm's recommendations. In the beginning, this takes the form of procedural rhetoric, as described by Ian Bogost. Madison Hansen, who tested the game, concludes, "In just a few minutes of swiping, you will discover the patterns, biases, and pitfalls of collaborative filtering for yourself." The game then explains the problem explicitly with the following note: real algorithms discriminate. The creators state on the game's website, "In our opinion, if an algorithm score penalizes some people somehow, it doesn't have to be illegal. People just ought to know how." This should assuage big tech companies who resist regulation of core intellectual property like recommendation algorithms. An informed consumer will improve digital inclusion, the treatment of minority people online. End of quote. In the introductory pages about the game, the organizers also highlight the ubiquity of algorithms. Links to related studies help build credibility and underscore the fact that recommendation systems will become increasingly important in the retail sector, social networks, and the entertainment industry in the future. The principle of experiencing how algorithms work can also be found in Survival of the Best Fit. The gamified iDoc illustrates how AI in the human resources sector can reinforce structural discrimination. It is based on simulations of AI-driven hiring decisions. At the start, users are tasked with hiring a certain number of people within a short period of time by viewing their CVs in the top right corner and then clicking Accept or Reject. They are blue and yellow figures. Users learn later what role the colors play in the game. Regardless of how quickly users accept or reject candidates, the game tells them that they are too slow at hiring. Then a simulated email suggests using a hiring algorithm based on machine learning. Users asked to drag and drop the CVs they've previously selected and then choose which additional data should be used to improve the accuracy of the machine learning algorithms: Google, Apple, or Amazon. From now on, the game runs automatically, and the decisions previously made by users are handled by the AI. In other words, users can no longer accept or reject candidates themselves. The hiring algorithm does this instead. As a user, you have no way to intervene and can only watch what happens next. Occasionally, you receive emails pointing out issues with the algorithm. One email also refers to a complaint from an applicant. You are then tasked with figuring out why the applicant was rejected. Users do this by selecting and comparing accepted and rejected applicants' profiles. If the users themselves cannot find a reason for the applicant's rejection or do not recognize any patterns, the game indirectly points out the bias to them through the option, "Maybe because Alvin is blue." The simulated chat that follows analyzes the accepted and rejected yellow and blue candidates and compares their performances. While their performance is very similar, it is striking that significantly more blue candidates were rejected. This is the same in every playthrough, regardless of what the players select beforehand. This has generated criticism in various forums. Users wondered why the outcome was always the same, regardless of how the player proceeded. Some disappointed users also wondered whether AI was actually being used in the game or if it was just simulated. In fact, unlike Monster Match, this interactive documentary is purely a simulation. No real algorithms were used to make the mechanisms experienceable. Since it is an educational game, the creators wanted to ensure that the message always gets across, even if users only select blue characters, as 𝗔𝗀𝘀𝘁𝗿𝗁 explained. The user agency was deliberately limited. However, this is also intended to reflect real-world mechanisms. Since a larger dataset from Google, Amazon, or Apple was used, there may be biases in the algorithms, even if users made completely different decisions during the manual selection process. At the end of the game, the message is always that the company must be shut down because of allegations of discrimination. Players also criticized this. Just saying there's a problem misses an opportunity to educate people on solutions. According to the project's initiator, 𝗔𝗀𝘀𝘁𝗿𝗁, the project is primarily aimed at raising awareness of the mechanisms. She says, this new development can actually worsen existing problems with bias, equality, and representation in the workplace and have negative socioeconomic repercussions. End of quote. In survival of the best fit, this is made tangible less through interactions and their consequences, but rather through predefined structures. Both projects create simulated experiential spaces that illustrate the discriminatory patterns of data-driven decision-making systems. While Monster Match uses the algorithm that users are supposed to experience, survival of the best fit merely simulates the use of an autonomous system. However, in both cases, the documentary gesture shifts toward a form of critical simulation. The process of playing through and experiencing algorithmic decision-making logic constructs a reference to reality. As the analysis showed, documentary projects based on AI and algorithms shift the act of documenting from a practice of showing to a practice of operating, in which reality is analyzed and interpreted. By rendering the mechanisms behind algorithms transparent, the aim of the personalized films, games, and simulations is to promote critical thinking and reflection. The affordances that these projects offer users, or rather do not offer, serve to demonstrate how algorithms could gain more power in the future, while users can only watch as these decisions have serious consequences. Personalization and the consequences of one's own actions function as key strategies for making mechanisms experienceable. Through direct interaction with algorithms and AI systems, audiences encounter not only the logic but also the contingencies and biases of algorithms, thus experiencing the conditions that might shape future knowledge. By foregrounding experiential interaction, these speculative iDocs perform the future in the present, turning algorithmic potential into lived experience. The project's educational value is particularly strong when real algorithms are involved, whereas disappointment sets in when this is merely simulated. If iDocs make use of the technologies that are the subject of criticism, meaning emerges through various algorithmically generated relationships. Instead of humans bearing witness to their experiences, there is a form of self-observation of machine-based processes of perception and decision-making. For documentary theory, this means that we must rethink the new documentary ecology as described by Kate Nash, Craig Hyde, and Catherine Summerhays as a post-human media ecology, and focus more on the possibilities of documenting the yet-to-be-known.